Katie, if you want to hit record. We're good? All right, very good. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for our second round of public engagement for Enderly Park. Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation staff are excited to share some progress that we've made in developing improvements for the park here that reflects your needs. My name is Bert Lynn. I am Capital Planning Division Director for Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation. And joining me tonight on the project team are Senior Planner Katie Lloyd, Planner Darnika Waters, and Planner Katie Daughtry. Before we move forward, I'd also like to introduce Lee Jones, who's the Director for Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation, to say a few words.
Thank you, Bert, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out from your busy schedules and for the onset of summer to participate in this important event, and that is to receive input on your hopes, aspirations, and need for Enderly Park. All of our parks are special, and we work hard to try to make sure that they are able to provide the recreation opportunities that you need and desire. I want to thank this team, and we have a couple of other folks on the line. We have our Deputy Director, Peter Cook. We have our Division Director for Maintenance and Operations, Mr. Greg Clemmer. And we also have our Deputy County Manager, Leslie Johnson, here on this call. We hope to be informed and to get your input tonight. And with that being said, I once again, thank you for coming out. I'm going to turn it back over to our Capital Planning Division Director, Bert Lynn. Thank you, Bert.
Thanks, Lee. All right, so let's get started. So during today's meeting, we want to discuss how this project was funded, share some feedback that we've received throughout the planning process to date. Most importantly, we wanted to hear from you about the proposed improvements. We have a series of questions and discussion items to narrow down the proposed improvements to the park. Before we get started, I wanted to walk you through some of the features of our virtual meeting platform. It's important that everybody stays muted throughout the presentation. You'll notice a button on the bottom left of your screen. Make sure that the red slash is through the microphone. We will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end, either by unmuting or using the chat feature. You're free to turn on your video during the presentation and during the discussion portion of today's meeting. You can do that by clicking the Start Video button on the bottom of your screen. If you have questions or comments throughout the presentation, please use the chat function. There's a button on the bottom of your screen to bring up and activate your chat box. Later in the presentation, we'll give everybody an opportunity to unmute and share your thoughts or ask us questions. Please use the raise hand button if you would like to speak. You will find that by clicking on the participants button. All right. Let's see, here we go. So last year, the Board of County Commissioners set aside $2 million as part of a broader equity initiative to use for reinvestment in park and recreation facilities. The funds that will be used to improve Enderly Park are part of that overall funding. Over the past 18 months, Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation have been working on our new Park and Recreation Master Plan, which we call MEC Playbook. One component of the plan is a full inventory and assessment of all of our parks, greenways, nature preserves, recreation centers, and other department facilities. As a result of the assessment, each park and rec facility was given a grade. The lower grade for Enderly Park made it a great candidate for significant investment now. This same system will be used to prioritize future investments in existing facilities. We completed the inventory and assessment of over 250 Mecklenburg Park and Recreation facilities. This assessment provides us with a snapshot of current conditions for every facility and will be updated regularly. Over time, this assessment will serve as a tool for benchmarking progress and prioritizing investment and reinvestment in our facilities. This process will provide us with an important method of accountability by getting eyes on all parks, greenways, nature preserves, and built facilities on a regular basis. So after the inventory and assessment were complete, the results were compiled and sorted into a summary. Enderly Park received a poor grade due to the current state of the basketball and tennis courts, overgrown vegetation along the creek, the state of some areas of the paved trails, and the age of the park furnishings and the signage within the park. The other parks that will receive significant investment as part of the county's broad equity initiative are LC Coleman Park in Washington Heights and the Tryon Hills Park just north of Uptown. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Katie Daughtry to talk a little bit more about the project.
Thank you, Bert. So here we're in this slide. Well, before I start, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I'm not sure if everyone tonight participated in any of our 3 previous meetings, but we're excited to have you here to kind of explain to you the next phase of the project. So since we met in March, we've taken the information that was shared along with the input we received on our public input webpage to begin developing 2 designs for the improved Enderly Park. Today, we're going to share some of the overall design ideas along with images of potential improvements for the park. Input we receive about these concepts will inform the final design for the park, which we will share with you this summer. Once we have buy-in from the neighborhood, we plan to finalize the design and get ready for construction. We anticipate beginning construction in late 2021 or early 2022, and we want to have a great big celebration in summer of 2022, if not before, if we're able to complete this sooner. Next slide, please. So the slide you see here is kind of an overview of some of the feedback that we've received in the first couple of meetings. We heard from a lot of people in those March meetings and in the online surveys. Most participants visited the park at least monthly. We heard your concerns about poor lighting, overgrown landscape, uneven pavement, off-leash dogs, and drainage issues. In terms of park improvements, many of you asked us to fix what was there and to address so that we could address some of your areas of concern. But also you wanted to add better and accessible entrances that are landscaped to be welcoming and beautiful. We heard that many of you were interested in new amenities for the park, such as multi-age play equipment, dog parks, and community gardens. We heard that you wanted to see more seating and trash cans, and we also heard that you wanted the park to support community scale events like festivals, farmers markets, and performances. We took this information into the and incorporated it into the initial design process. I'm going to turn it over to Katie, I believe, on our next slide to conduct a couple of polls.
Next slide, Bert. All right, thank you. So if you've attended the March meetings, this might look familiar to you, but this was just to get an idea of who was on the call. We're asking, have you ever been to Enderly Park? I'll give you a couple more seconds to answer that question. All right. So I'll end the polling and share the results. It looks like most of you on the call have been there before. So that gives us a good idea of who's on the call tonight. Next slide, Bert. Okay. And then the next question, we're curious if any of you attended the Saturday pop-up this past Saturday. And while you guys answer that question, I'll give you a little bit of information about what we heard on Saturday. We heard many people were still concerned about the lighting within the park. There was interest in additional play equipment. There was also interest expressed in more than one shelter if the budget allowed. Generally, people supported resurfacing the tennis courts and basketball courts, while they preferred removing the baseball to expand the play field. There was also interest in a potential dog park or other uses within that playfield area. Here's the results of the poll. It looks like at least one person on the call attended the Saturday event. All right, with that, I will turn it back over to Katie.
All right, so before we dive into the two concepts, let's kind of briefly go over the amenities that currently exist in the park. So in case you haven't visited, the park has a playground, a picnic shelter, a baseball field that also has enough field space to kind of have a multi-purpose component, 2 tennis courts, 1 basketball court, and a loop trail. There's some limited on-street parking on Enderly Road, which is kind of on the west side of the park. But most of the park is intended to serve neighbors who can walk or bike to the site. Next slide, please. So as we go through some of the proposed improvements, we anticipate about half of the budget will go towards fixing up the bones of the park. So our plan is to repave the walking loop, add an accessible entrance to Coker Avenue, which is on the east side of the park, address drainage issues, cut back overgrown vegetation, plant additional landscaping at the park entrances, add site furniture, and replace the existing water fountain. We heard from you that these foundational improvements are very important. The following two concepts will explore how we spend the remainder of our budget and what types of amenities are most important for the community. Note that you may prefer elements in each concept or even have other ideas. The concepts are just a starting point for our discussion. Next slide, please. All right, so here we have concept A. So keep in mind, all of the things that we've already talked about are incorporated into this plan as well. So this is kind of building on those fundamental improvements that we plan on doing. So concept A was designed with the idea that generally we'll put back the amenities that are there now. The shelter shifts a bit to accommodate a porch or overlook seating area. The tennis and basketball courts would be resurfaced and restriped, while the baseball field would be improved, as well as stands being added for onlookers. In this concept, we're also proposing to add fitness stations along the walking loop to activate the southeast side of the park. Next slide, please. So again, in this concept, we would be doing all of those base improvements that we previously discussed. But this concept also explores a few kind of new ideas. So in this concept, we would relocate the basketball court to where the tennis courts are now. This would allow us to add an additional basket or half court of play. In the old basketball court location, we would propose a large fitness court as well as a second picnic shelter. The existing shelter would be replaced in its current location, which means that this concept has 2 shelters in 2 different locations. This concept also shows removing the baseball field and expanding the open play field, which can be used for athletics. We're also showing potentially adding play equipment along the walking loop to activate the southeast side of the park. And in this area as well, we would be proposing an edible orchard. Next slide, please. So these pictures are kind of a representation of what some of these items are. You may not be familiar with some of the terminology that we used. And we heard in March that many people were interested in adding a community garden. After evaluation and discussion with staff, we believe the community garden should be located adjacent to the Betty Ray Thomas Rec Center due to existing infrastructure and programming opportunities. You may notice that a dog park wasn't shown on either concept. After discussions with staff, we felt that the space required to add a dog park would limit the recreational uses of the field. We did hear from some of the neighbors on Saturday, however, that they would support using some of the field space as a dog park. So you can kind of imagine where the edible orchard was shown in the previous concept, potentially some of that area and plus some being used for a potential dog park location if that's something that interests folks. Note that even these elements that were shown in one of the concepts, if they're important to you, the final design could incorporate it. Next slide, please.
All right, with that, I think we're going to see the folks on the call if they have a preference between option A or option B, or parts of both. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. And as a reminder, option A included resurfacing and restriping the existing tennis courts and basketball, keeping the baseball, shifting one shelter over. Option B included relocating basketball to where tennis is, adding a larger fitness court and a potential second shelter where basketball currently is, and taking away baseball and expanding the playfield area. Okay, I think we're to the same amount of votes as last time. So I'll end polling and share the results. It looks like about half of the people on the call prefer option B, and the other half prefer parts of both. So with that, we want folks to tell us why they chose that and what it was about B or parts of both that they preferred. And so on the next slide, Bert, we've got a screen here where we can start to write down some ideas. So you feel free to type into the chat, or a fairly small group, I think you could probably unmute and share some of your ideas. Don't be shy.
While we wait for folks, they might be in the middle of typing in the chat there. From what I recall, most of the folks that I talked to at the meeting on Saturday were starting to lean a little bit more toward keeping the two courts as they are. So redoing tennis in that space, basketball in that space, but rethinking the way that we use the field where the baseball field is right now.
So Bert, we did get this one question, and I'll ask it to you. He said option B allows more multi-usage of the park. However, I would like to know if there is a way that we can include motorized vehicle trails.
Motorized vehicle. So we typically don't allow motorized vehicles kind of within the parks or along our greenway trails unless they're needed for mobility. So, we don't have, the motorized scooters and things that you see, zooming around uptown a lot within our parks. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've got a lot of folks there typically. And then in some cases, people walking dogs. And so we don't want to get into an issue where we have a conflict that could result in somebody getting injured.
Any other questions or comments? All right.
Hi.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi. I've been there, in Southside Park, which is on Redmond, a few times. And I've realized that the field that is being used, my son's team played other teams in the area, and it was pretty well used as a multifunctional play field. And this is not really far from there. That's why I picked B. And secondly, the basketball area had some level of synergy and play, which I don't think I've seen in many parks around. So it had very high level of activity and intense use in these two categories, with of course some amount of children's play area activity. So which is why I picked B. So that's something which again I think I'll have an option to see this weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, Sri. All right, feel free to if you think of anything else to add more to the chat, or we'll have opportunities to add more to the public input page later as well. Was someone else about to speak? Brett, let's go on to the next page.
Okay, so you folks tonight are going to get to be our guinea pigs. We're testing out something new that we hope will be a success and that we can potentially use going forward. So on the page here, you see a QR code, or you can go to our website, and Katie just put the web address link in the chat. And if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you're going to see a budget question. And basically, the idea behind this question is you go through and select the things that are most appealing to you, but you can't spend more money than's allotted. So for what's remaining in our budget, we have about $300,000. Like we said earlier, we're spending half of our budget on the bones of the park, and then the other half is kind of to be decided by the community. So if you want, we can kind of hang out here, and you can go ahead and navigate to the page and go through those options. And that way we're here and available if you have questions as you're walking through it. If not, you can do it later. It's kind of up to you. But Katie or Bert, whoever's in charge of the presentation, if we could navigate back to those pictures, that might help some folks as they're going through the budget questions to see what those items actually might look like in the real world. So I don't know if we want to just kind of hang out for a minute or two, and if y'all have questions as you're scrolling through, just speak up and let us know.
Yeah, and if you'd rather see one of the two options on the page here, I'm happy to move over to those slides as well.
Oh, and there's a map. If you get confused about the different areas, there's a map above that question that shows you where those amenities are to be focused. So they're tied to certain areas of the park.
And for those of you who are, associated with the county, but not part of our kind of project team here, because this is something new, it might be something that you would be interested in going and looking at as well. It's a function that we hope to use a lot more in the future to get people more actively involved in helping us kind of plan on how we build out our parks. Let me go to the final slide. Oops. That has our contact information. So myself, Katie Lloyd, Katie Daughtry, and Darnika Waters are heading up the planning effort for Enderly Park. Our next steps will be in the next couple of weeks, we'll tally up the results from the meeting that we had tonight, the meeting we held last Saturday, and additional input that we get through the publicinput.com page to finalize and use that information to come up with a final master plan for the park. And then begin the actual design documents for that. We plan to bid the project later this summer and hope to have everything ready to go and ready to open the new Enderly Park next spring. So if you have any questions, now would be a great time to ask those. And if not, then we appreciate you joining us tonight.